Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin. And today, joining me is somebody that I've been looking forward to talking to for quite some time. Ran across him by divine providence, perhaps. I don't know exactly what to call it, but I've long been interested in isometrics training. And of course, I have a martial arts background. And John Haas, whom I have with me right now, is somebody who is an expert at both of these things, and he's got a lot to say about both topics. And in particular, although I think everybody's heard of isometrics and everyone's done maybe a little bit of it, nobody's really gone all the way in a very long time. There was a time at which isometrics training was like all of a sudden at the cutting edge, and it proved its worth, and then it just disappeared. And so we're going to talk about that as well. And before we dive into it, I'm going to let all my new listeners know that if you have not already, highly recommend that you get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It's absolutely free. It is at 9minutechallenge.com. That's the number 9minutechallenge.com. No need to waste energy by typing NINE into a search engine. We got other things to do. And if you're as busy as I am, and as I assume you are, then just that one number, 9minutechallenge.com, is going to get you into that challenge. And the 9-minute challenge itself is going to get you in, out, and strong in 9 minutes. And it can be done with any other program you're doing. A lot of people find it to be very complementary with their training, either as a warm up or as a finisher or something to do on their in between days. So 9minutechallenge.com, and it is all yours. And speaking of all yours, the floor is all yours now, John. I am very curious to hear a little bit about your origin story, because rare is it that I hear of a martial arts monk who has a Zoom connection that I can speak with him on the topic of martial arts and isometrics. So I'm curious a little bit about, in particular, your background, your origin story, like how you got into physical culture in general, and in particular, how you ended up down this very, very cool path that you are now on.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex, for having me here. I appreciate it. Happy to be here. And you know, I probably got started in martial arts like most kids from, I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. And of course, there was the whole Saturday morning kung fu. There was, Bruce Lee. And later in the 80s was the ninja boom. So I was just kind of in that whole culture of martial arts, and there was no internet. So, I mean, what else are you going to do?
Right.
And I remember probably being in third grade when my best friend at the time said, "Hey, my dad's friend teaches Taekwondo. Do you want to do that with me?" I'm like, I don't know what Taekwondo is, but sure, I would love to do that. And from that day on, it sparked just such an interest, a passion for all things martial art related. And I know we're going to get into isometrics later, but I
Mm-hmm.
do need to tell you this really cool story about when we were first starting in Taekwondo, because we would get in trouble all the time and in class, And the funny thing is, back in the 80s, people were old school. And so when we got in trouble, there was a punishment. And for us, that punishment was standing in a horse stance, parallel to the ground, with our arms stretched out, holding phone books on each hand. And we would stand there and we would shake. And of course, the instructor would be like, you guys drop those phone books, it's 50 push-ups. And you're 10, man. Of
Yeah.
course you're gonna drop the phone books. You're 10. So we're holding these phone books, we're shaking like crazy, all the while looking at each other going, this is cool as shit. This is cool as shit. But that was probably my first isometrics introduction.
Yeah.
Little did I know. And from there, studied Okinawan karate, moved into the old school Japanese martial arts, So I studied Bujinkan martial arts for about 25 years. Um, and in between, got to study a whole bunch of different things from working with some of the Marine Corps martial arts programs to training some Systema, some mixed martial arts, Jeet Kune Do, Kali, Eskrima, and of course, internal arts of Ichuan, Tai Chi, and a bunch of other things, Aikido, Aiki along the way. And that's pretty much, everything's still going, evolving, moving from training those arts to creating everything into one system that works for me and my students.
Yeah. Now, I like your story about the punishment because, I have a good friend of mine is a 6th degree black belt in Kyokushin karate, Ronin Katz. And he studied, believe it or not, in Japan. He got the first 3 degrees on his black belt from Masoyama, which is,
Amazing.
yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, it would be basically like learning Jeet Kune Do and getting your black belt from Bruce Lee himself. Like for the
Yeah.
people in the karate world, it's a big deal. And I haven't talked to him a lot about it, but one thing he said very distinctly once was that his schooling at Masoyama's school in Japan, it was not a feel good experience. Plenty of punishments. The one I think that you were put through that does sound fun, honestly. I think the stuff they were getting hit with was like you get hit with like a bamboo stick and maybe it had some, I don't know, slits cut out, so it like really hurt. I'm
Right,
just
right.
assuming here, but yeah, but that was the old school. It was like, you were expected to go there and get tough. And so in addition to getting really good
Yes.
technique, you were expected to learn discipline. It wasn't a babysitting thing. I think at some point or another, kind of people got this idea that I'll drop the kids off there and then I'll go run my errands and, they'll be taken care of.
Yeah, I definitely think that, back in the 80s and also probably in the early 90s when I was training Bujinkan, I also remember, my instructor would have us, we would go into this, we were in this old, decrepit YMCA in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and no air conditioning. It was a sauna in the summer, it was freezing in the winter. Um, but he would take us into this tiny room that had mirrors, and he would go, okay, you're going to sit as low as possible in your stance, and you're going to stay there. And then you're going to do your kata as slow and as perfect as possible. And we did that for hours at a
Wow.
time. So, you know, but the end result was your form was perfect.
Yeah.
You knew exactly, your proprioception was dialed in. You knew exactly which way your foot was, where your weight was, how your balance was, how your structure was working and supported, and everything was, aligned perfectly. And when you moved, I mean, it was powerful.
Yeah.
So all those things, man, just kind of work together to build this insane amount of structural strength and martial power that, that's the term I love to use is martial power.
Yeah.
But for the non-martial artists, it's called being good at life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you know what? I gotta say, I think one of the things I really like about this story is that the past two stories is that, you're talking about growing up in the 70s and the 80s. It really like your so far your martial arts experience really does sound like an 80s movie montage, where it's just like super hardcore training. Like there's got to be some pump up music in the background. You have expect to see
Right,
Rocky, chasing, chickens in the
right, right.
farmyard or whatever. But that sort of a thing worked really well. And I think the only reason it seems like it fell out of style was because people got interested in fast. I want fast results. I want to move fast. I want to prove that I
Right.
can move fast. But it's interesting you say this because now this connects something in my head that makes much more sense. Georges St. Pierre, who's like widely agreed to be one of the best mixed martial artists of all time. Yeah, he's
Sure.
on
Yeah.
like everybody's Mount Rushmore at least has Georges St. Pierre. And I remember hearing a very interesting story of Chael Sonnen, who was also a high level contender. He never got to championship status, but he fought a number of people who were champions. And he was
Mm.
telling a story about how he was working out once or training with Georges St. Pierre, and his approach, one of the things that he mentions lines up perfectly with what you just said, because he said they were doing some grappling, and they were working on, maybe it was like a knee bar or some sort of like a submission, and George would slow it down. It would take 10 seconds to lock in the submission, and he would
Yeah,
just perfect it. And that was his goal when he was there, was not to get it fast, but to do it as slowly and perfectly as possible. Similarly, he said he never did sparring sessions more than 25 minutes, because he said a championship bout is not going to last more than 5 5-minute rounds. So there's no reason for me to do anything more than that. And one of the things Chael said was, he said, I don't know if this is the right answer for your training, but George is about the most perfect martial artist anyone's ever seen. I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah,
but
yeah,
in essence, he's a Kyokushin guy, and so he grew up probably around the same era that you did, and had, I'm sure, some very tough and demanding coaches. I bet you anything they were doing isometrics, they were doing the super slow stuff, and I
yeah,
bet you that's where he got that habit.
yeah, absolutely. I think, the phrase slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right?
Yeah.
And I think we kind of missed something, to your point, when we started to try to go fast
Hmm.
right off the bat,
Yeah.
because people don't understand. We don't have the attention span anymore that we used to have, right? Everything is fast, fast, fast.
Yep.
You're scrolling through TikTok or whatever. Everything is, dopamine hit, boom, 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 boom. And we do not appreciate the fact that being able to do something slowly leads to perfection.
Yeah.
Being able to do something slowly kind of burns it into the nervous system. And we it's to our detriment, because we get injured more often. I don't believe we're as powerful as we can be.
Hmm.
I don't believe we move as well as we can be, because we've missed that working with your structure and understanding, how the alignment and the connection and the internal pressure using your breath, you know, happens to build phenomenal strength from the inside out. And if we don't understand that, then we miss a lot of the important lessons that the master martial artists and even the old time strongmen were teaching us.
Yeah.
You look at those guys, and they are right in alignment with internal martial art. In internal martial art, they say that my intent, right, my willpower, my mind leads my energy,
Hmm.
which leads my strength. Look at the mighty Adam, who said, you think you're strong, and you are,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's your mind that creates these connections. It's mind body technology. And if we don't have the mind part, you know, we're missing a huge piece of the
It
puzzle.
it's great that you mentioned the mighty Atom, because he's literally the person I was thinking of the most. And what's particularly, I think, salient is that people who don't know who he is, will give a very brief overview. A, he was I think the youngest child of like the poorest family in the poorest village
Yeah.
in his part of Poland. And through a series of events, he ended up being taken under the wing of a traveling circus and a strongman named Champion Volenko. And among the people that he came across during his journey, first of all, Volenko told him the first thing he said was, you have to learn how to breathe properly. And by learning how to breathe properly, that sort of imbued him with this ability, this internal ability to start to generate his strength. I think he also learned yogic breathing techniques from the great Gamma, the greatest wrestler in human history,
Yes.
who's
Yeah.
fought like 5,000 matches, never lost, and he fought the best of the best. Uh, I think he fought to a draw like twice in his 50-year career. that was it. And of course, yoga, like the yoga breathing techniques, is originally it has its background in like Indian martial arts, and
Right.
so there is this connection that people forget about between the martial arts and all things old school, whether it's old school strongman, old school martial arts, internal and external, and what we do now in the strength world. And unfortunately, we've jettisoned some of the really effective stuff. And that's one of the things I really love about reading your material and reading your emails is getting some insights that I haven't been able to get anywhere else from
Mm.
this these really ancient systems. And I want to know in particular about isometrics. Now, you talked about maybe your first experience with it with your hard ass taekwondo instructor. When did you start doing it intentionally? When were you like, I want to try this out as a means of getting stronger and more resilient?
Sure. Um, my first physical culture influence was Bruce Lee.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, as a martial artist, if you, especially, in the 70s and 80s, if you were not following Bruce Lee, like reading his stuff and trying out his workouts, like what were you doing with your life? Um,
Even
and
now.
even now, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
Like the phenomenal thing about Bruce was that I believe he was one of the first people to supplement his martial art training with a very specific programmable strength and conditioning regimen.
Hmm.
And he really kind of brought those two together in a way that, we see now in MMA, but back in the 60s, I don't think anybody was doing it. Maybe they did some road work, um, but nobody was doing what Bruce was doing with strength and conditioning and martial arts. And just reading his stuff, he had a daily isometrics routine. And I believe he got his routine from Bob Hoffman.
Mm.
And Bob Hoffman's old school physical culture magazine. I think Bruce probably sent away for an isometrics course, but he had a daily set of 8 isometric exercises that he would do. And plus, I mean, everybody's seen the pictures of Bruce, pulling on the chain, doing the curls with the bar and the chain that he's standing on the plate. So that was my first introduction to isometrics specifically, aside from martial arts where I was being punished. The Bruce's ideas were a huge influence. And from so as I started to study that, fast forward, I don't know, into the late 90s, maybe like 99, and I came across Russian martial arts.
Mm.
And I came across the Ross system and Scott Sonnet.
Of course.
And as fortune would have it, I was teaching martial arts in this park in central New Jersey. And right across the bridge from where I was teaching, there were these two guys teaching Russian martial art. And we just started talking one day, and I found out that they were instructors in the Ross training system. They trained with Scott Sonnen, and we started cross-pollinating. I taught them Japanese martial arts, especially sword work. They loved, and they taught me Russian martial art. And I got fascinated with their conditioning work, with the breath work. Um, and that was actually my first introduction to a kettlebell,
Mm.
was back in like 2000.
Yeah. It was
I
very, very new back then.
It was eye-opening, but I think I've completely digressed from the isometrics
No,
angle.
no, no. This is great actually because the thing is about isometrics is that on the one hand, it's like the most obvious thing ever. The heaviest weight you can lift is the weight you can't lift. So you
Exactly.
keep pushing, you keep pulling, but you got to get there somehow. You got to start somewhere. And so this is perfect. And I especially like, Systema is big on all these into the internal elements of martial arts, and they have a very, very cool system. So yeah, please continue. This is awesome.
Awesome, awesome. So, one day, we're training in the park, and one day, this guy, his name is Oleg, and Oleg, if you're out there listening, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, привет.
Uh, he came in and he brings this cannonball with a handle, and I'm going, what the? And I believe it was, probably a 24 kilo bell,
Mm,
and I'm like, what is this? So he says, I'm going to teach you how to work with this. And he's like, you clean like this, you press like this, you swing like this. And I'm like, it took me a while,
yeah.
'cause completely brand new. And I said to him, I'm like, man, I think this was right as Pavel's Dragon Door RKC was just kind of starting out.
Yeah.
So I said to him, I'm like, oh man, are you certified? Like, are you an RKC? And he looks at me and he goes, no. In Russia, my dad taught me because we had kettlebell outside my house. My dad said, you do like this, you do like this. He goes, that was my certification when I was 12.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, okay. But, from there, it started a lifelong love of kettlebells. And eventually I became certified under Scott Sonnen as a CST and, club bells and all of that information was just kind of groundbreaking at the time. This was before TACFIT existed.
Hmm.
This was really with Scott's transition from the Ross training system into developing his own system. So I got to see that transition. I got to train with both sides, which was amazing. And looking back, it was such a phenomenal experience. At the time, I was like, yeah, this is just what we're doing. This is how we roll. But now I'm like, oh my God, like this was the origin of all these different things that we have today.
Hmm.
This was before CrossFit, this was before TACFit, this is before, you know, animal movement and things like that. So it was kind of the forefront of all this functional training that we now take for granted.
Yeah. It's incredible. And Scott Sonnen, he's one of those guys who really was a visionary. And I think what's great about him too is he went to Russia to learn uh was it Sistema or Sambo? I don't remember which of the
And
two.
both,
Both.
both.
Okay. That's why I can't
So
remember
he
because it's both
was
of
he
them.
was actually a sambo. He was a sambo player,
Yeah.
and he was in Russia learning sambo. And what happened was he got an invitation. He got two invitations, right? One was to train at this super premier sambo academy, and the other was to train with this Ross training system
Hmm.
under the Grandmaster. And he chose the Ross training system. And everything kind of evolved from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Just incredible stuff. I've seen actually I think I saw something recently where Scott posted like his first time meeting Pavel. And this was back when
I
Pavel
saw
was
that. Yeah.
also a new immigrant. And
Yes.
I think they were it was a martial arts event and they like beat each other up. It was like a kickboxing
Yes,
sort of a
yes.
thing. And, because Pavel had learned karate in the Soviet Special Forces, where he was a drill instructor. Yeah, it's so cool. Like I love the history of it, and I in particular love the. I know that Pavel was also a big fan of isometrics because this was something that he did in his early days when he didn't
Mm,
have access to kettlebells. He was, and a new immigrant in Minnesota, so he would do calisthenics and some isometrics and stuff like that. And
nice.
as a fan of the old school, he immediately just jumped right into it. And so you've gotten the start now with this gentleman Oleg, and who is certified by his dad. And like any good Russian, had a
That's
kettlebell at
right.
home and he was able to swing it and
That's
press it
right.
and all this other good stuff.
That's right.
And so by now you're probably starting to develop this pretty good routine for your training. You got calisthenics, you've got your presumably calisthenics, you've got your kettlebell training, you've got the martial arts that you've been doing all this time. You're learning the Russian stuff and you're teaching the traditional Eastern stuff to the Russian guys. And was there some point at which they were like, "Hey, you got to try this isometric stuff," or was this sort of a thing that because you had been interested in the Bruce Lee stuff and you were doing the bull worker things that you started
We
getting?
did you kind of glitched out there for a second.
Okay, well, we're back now, I think. It seems like everything's working.
Okay, good. Okay.
Good.
Okay, good. I was like, hello?
Can you hear me?
Um, I can hear you. Yes,
Okay,
we're
good.
good.
Perfect.
We are good. Um, we did do several different types of isometric holds training, you know, especially I know you're familiar with the Systema push-up, right?
Yeah.
And it's always the push-ups on the fists. And we would do kind of 5-minute holds
Oh my God.
just in the push-up position. And those were brutal.
Oh yeah.
And you're shake, but it's, you got to work the breath, the whoo, 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 kind of that burst breathing type stuff. You got to keep getting the oxygen flowing through the body and clear the lactic acid. And then one of the fun things that we would do is once you could hold that for 5 minutes, then they kind of did these body toughening exercises
Hmm.
where they just kind of walk around and kind of hit you as you're holding the position, which is great.
Yeah.
And then you have to learn not only can you breathe through the hold, but can you breathe through the hit? So, and it's you can't really move your body too well because you're trying to hold this isometric position. So, can you clear that physical um, trauma with your breath?
Yeah.
So, and working with the breath to create this internal pressure, so you can support yourself from the inside out. And the end goal is that you're almost like an inflated tire
Hmm.
where, you can, something can hit and you just kind of absorb and neutralize.
Yeah.
And we did, all these cool different exercises to work the isometrics, the breath, the movement, and putting it all together to create a very powerful structure, which then goes right into the internal martial arts, where again, you're holding stances with a different feeling though. So, when you're working with an isometric, right, I am actively applying as much tension as I can to, you know, with this exercise. But if I'm going into like this standing meditation where I'm doing jamjong, then all of my tension is only in supporting myself. So then I have to kind of stand without the tension, which is its own exercise in patience
Yeah.
and frustration.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Now I like what you mentioned about pushing as hard as you can because I think a lot of people we've talked about the combination of martial arts and isometrics for a while now, but there's also a history, albeit a little bit more recently perhaps, of isometrics training for the iron game. And frankly, beyond that too. I mean, it's the same thing really with gymnastics because you think of some of the most impressive gymnastics holds you see, and it's all
Yeah.
isometrics like the iron cross and the front lever, the back lever, even L sits, things like this. And these have a pedigree of making people extremely strong. And so it's not that isometrics is only good for martial artists, but rather that the martial artists see the benefits of it for just physical toughness and strength, and particularly the ability to endure a
Mm,
lot, and because they're dishing out and taking quite a lot. So, in particular, again, a lot of times people think of isometrics, they think, okay, you're just not moving, you're just holding a position, which is one of them. But then
right.
there's also overcoming isometrics, where you're actively trying to push or pull or squat or otherwise move an object that will not move. And that gives the body different adaptations, complementary to what we talked about earlier, but it also has some pretty neat effects on some of the more vulnerable parts of the body. So tell us a little bit about that as well.
So I think a lot of these pushing and pulling against immovable objects, or even using like a strap, or for martial artists you use a belt, right? And one of the most impressive ways of developing punching power is taking that strap and holding that strap as you're trying to extend that punch, and doing it at different ranges,
Mm,
and really, you know, putting all the possible force in as you're grounding yourself, as you're rooting, as you're rotating, as you're overcoming. All of these things increase the neural drive for those movements, and you start to work on patterning the nervous system into firing in that movement and creating that power throughout that punch,
mhm.
working with those different things. I think I told you before we started that I've been using isometrics with some of my older clients,
Yeah.
and some of them, if they've got knee issues, we're talking people who are in their late 70s, early 80s, and some of them are starting to develop, joint issues, wear and tear, and we've been using isometrics to kind of build their strength around their joints. We've been working with um, wall sits for them, especially. They get that muscular development, they get that tendon strength, and they work on keeping everything, especially those knees, and in your 70s, 80s, those knees become fragile, the hips become fragile. And the more we can strengthen the connective tissue, the more it kind of holds everything in place. And we've gotten some phenomenal results. The other day, I told you I was recently moving, and when I was moving, I was kind of selling some stuff online, and I had some guy come to my house who was a trainer to
Hmm.
buy some of my equipment, and I was wrapping up a session with my one of my clients who's 80 years old, and she is 80, almost 81. She does full push-ups on the ground.
Wow.
She swings a 35-pound kettlebell at 81 years old.
It's
And
impressive.
I was telling him this, and he's like, how is this possible? And I said, she started doing a lot of isometrics.
Hmm.
I mean, just positionally to work the hip hinge, positionally to work the strength in the shoulders for the push-ups. And she now is like, boom, with her push-ups. Her swings are crisp. I mean, it's crazy, but I think that using isometrics as a supplement, kind of working different problem areas, like for example, if you're doing a kettlebell press and you have a sticking point, right?
Yeah.
If I have a sticking point, then I'm going to hold at that sticking point and work that isometrically until I can get through that sticking point, until
Yeah.
I can get through to the next sticking point. And um, with all of these older people using the isometrics to kind of strengthen around those joints, work through their sticking points, and then to watch them actually get stronger
Hmm.
as they get older is mind-blowing,
Yeah.
but expected if you do it the right way.
Yeah, that a lot of people ask me, is it possible to get older now that is it possible to get stronger now that I'm older, now that I'm like, I mean, sometimes it's people in their 30s asking, and I'm like, you've got
Yeah,
your whole life ahead of you, man. Like, even if it
exactly,
weren't, wouldn't you want
exactly.
to like give it a shot? Like, what are you going to be out like a year or two? But
Right.
yeah, like one of the things that's really great about isometrics for anybody, including people who are injured, is something you just touched on, uh, is strengthening the connective tissues and, the tendons and the ligaments they can adapt, they can be made stronger, but it's a little bit different from muscles, which have this blood flow that can, rejuvenate them a little bit more quickly. You need to spend a bit more time with isometric movements, but it has a great impact on strengthening the tendons, strengthening the ligaments, and they need that kind of mechanical loading to get a lot stronger. And
Mm,
if you've got somebody who has an injured joint or a sensitive joint, you could put them in positions where they can push very, very strongly or pull very, very strongly, and the joint's not moving. So the likelihood that they're going to get hurt, it's not impossible, but it's far, far lower. And then as you described
yeah,
too,
yeah.
like this goes back to what we talked about, like really slow movements and being in a position like a deep squat or very low squat position and doing the kata very slowly. It's building that awareness of your body's sense of itself in space, its proprioception, and it
Mm.
is turning it into a power tool to allow you to get stronger. I mean, the example of this 80-year-old woman is perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you don't have to be 80 to do these things, right?
Yeah,
Like you said, these people in their 30s, I think that anyone at any age obviously can benefit from isometric training.
yeah,
You know, I have been working with clients all over the world, and in every one of my programs, I'm always putting in some type of isometric work
hmm,
because not only is it, I think they're great, I think they're fun, but they're also phenomenally effective. Like all of the research, that you can find points to, okay, we're gonna build strength. We're even going to build strength throughout a range of motion, even though we're not moving. We're going to strengthen ligaments. We're going to strengthen tendons. We're going to preserve joint function. We're going to create additional power output, and we're going to fill in gaps and strengthen areas that might be weak where power leaks.
hmm,
And, a lot of these things, to me, martial arts is the micro of the macro.
hmm,
Like you, when people were starting to put together martial arts, they were doing these things as a way, not really for health in the beginning, but as a way to save your life,
yeah,
right? These things are life and death, and these things are deadly combat where these techniques must work, they must be effective because I need to protect my life and I need to protect the life of my loved ones. And if these techniques fail, then my loved ones are in peril. So when you think of it in that type of context, then you understand that the time and the training and the effort and the experience and the knowledge that went into building these arts. And then now, when we take them and we can use them for health and we can use them for building a powerful life and for enjoyment and for still for protection, right?
yeah,
You always have to be able to protect yourself and your loved ones.
yeah,
That is paramount, absolutely paramount. But understanding that martial arts have been probably one of the driving forces behind physical culture
yeah,
and seeing that, all of these things from the conditioning work to the stance work to the isometrics to the functional strength training, the reason it's functional is because it was used within the context of these arts to create a life-saving technique.
yeah.
It's the definition of functional, right? If I can save my own life, it's pretty damn functional.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
I no, you're spot on, and it's great you mentioned this because I just recently posted a podcast with my friend Pavel Matsik, who's a Master Strong First instructor and also a lifelong martial artist, and we talked about basically the same thing about like one of the things that makes the old school anything so effective is that it had a purpose outside of health or a hobby. It was like it had to work or something really bad could happen. It's like, the old school strongman. They couldn't fiddle around with, silly stuff that, I'm going to put an inch on your arms in a week or whatever. It's like they needed to be able to perform. It was their livelihood. And if they got hurt, they couldn't work. And if they couldn't work, they couldn't pay their bills. They couldn't live.
Right.
They might be out of work. And so, likewise, I mean, doubly true with martial arts because the whole idea was don't die,
Right.
like what could be
Exactly.
more fundamental than that? What could be more functional than finding a way to, not die when somebody's trying to do the exact opposite? So, yeah, that's spot on. And I think in particular, people lose sight because we live in a pretty nice and largely nonviolent world nowadays. But
Mm.
the world that gave rise to these things that we now know and love had a different idea in mind, and keeping that in
Mm.
mind helps us to inform how we move forward. And so, how do people move forward in particular with isometrics? There's one thing to do some planks or to get punished in a taekwondo class, but if somebody wants to start tossing in some isometrics training in their own workouts, what would be like a good example of something that they could do, even just today, that would be simple, but it would give them the insight they need to start moving forward?
Excellent question. Excellent question. I think one of the most fundamental isometric exercises, aside from the planks and the squat holds that we've been talking about, is a wall press, right? Everybody has a wall. Everybody's got a wall or access to a wall.
Hmm.
And if you place both hands against the wall, put one foot back so you're in a stable stance, right? And you are doing two things at the same time, right? There's always this union of opposites we talk about in internal arts. But in isometrics, as I'm pushing into the wall, I'm pushing into the ground. I'm transferring that force through my structure
Hmm.
into the ground and from the ground into the wall. This basically creates a dynamic force relationship between myself and the object. And what it does is it strengthens my entire body from hands through to feet, especially around the midsection, where I am working on absorbing, retranslating, and issuing force.
Hmm.
Now, most people will look at this and be like, you're pushing a wall. But you gotta be smarter than that.
Yeah.
You got to know what's going on internally. You got to have the mind-body connection to take this exercise to the next level, right? I'm not just pushing a wall or I'm not just pushing a car, right? How am I, how am I standing? How am I braced? How am I translating that force through my core? How am I retranslating that force from the ground, because there's a rebound effect,
Yeah.
into the wall? And all of this is happening without me moving. And if you can understand and wrap your head around those concepts, then now you have taken what is a very simple looking exercise and created something with depth and purpose and function.
Absolutely. I like that. And I definitely recommend that people go out and actually give this a shot and they try the wall press as you've described. And the other thing too, like with anything else, you might feel a difference in a day, but it's going to be, the weeks and the months in particular of doing this practice that is going to have the biggest impact. And so that people don't think that this is just something theoretical. Again, it takes a lot of, this is where I think the most obvious connection with the martial arts is that you've got to have this internal sense of yourself because nothing's going to be moving. So that gives you the opportunity to think, what are my hands doing? What are my legs doing? What is my core
Right.
doing? And so there's this sort of internal focus that you can then push into an external attempt. And I think it's super cool. I think it reminds me too, just to give people an example. And this is a documented example. There was from World War One, there was a strongman named Alexander Zass.
There's
Uh,
that. Yeah.
yeah, he was Samson, is what his stage name was. There's a famous picture of him. I'm pretty sure it's him. Yeah, it's him for sure. A picture of him carrying a horse across a river in
Yes.
Russia,
Yes.
like on his back. He somehow managed to convince this animal to, that everything was gonna be fine if he did this. But he was imprisoned, I think, by the Germans, and he was able, due to his isometric strength, he was able to literally bend the bars on the
Yeah.
window of the cell holding him, and then I think fashion one of these bars into a grappling hook, climb down the mountain, and escape. And
Yeah.
frankly, I think if you do that, you deserve to escape. So I think he was able to get his freedom from there. Not that they didn't try to pursue him anyway, but nevertheless, this is a very well-known example. And again, it's just from isometrics. He was able to get that strong that he was able to pull the bars apart. Now,
Yeah.
if
I
people
think he
want to
actually escaped twice.
twice, that's right, that's
I
right.
think he escaped twice.
I guess they didn't have any reinforced, steel or iron or anything like that. They were old school. But it's an incredible story. Now you've got some great isometric training material out there as well, and I think that, again, anybody listening to this and who's sort of cottoned on to this idea that the old timers were on to something, both in terms of martial arts, strength training. By the way, even not so old timers. It was Bill March was a very well known lifter back in, I think, the 60s, 50s or 60s, and he did isometrics, then put like 100 pounds on all of his lifts, like individually,
Yeah.
on all of his competitive lifts in a few months, which is, I mean, like lightning speed. A newbie would be lucky to do that maybe in a year. He was very, very seasoned lifter, and he was able to do it. And he had some special equipment, like a particular power rack that he used and that sort of a thing. But in talking to you, I understand that although special equipment can be very, very useful, it's not necessarily something that people have to have. And you have a plethora of information and resources on isometric training for people who want to get started and put this into their training. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've got?
Absolutely. So, like we've been talking about, when I train my clients, I always include isometrics. Um, and for the past 10, maybe 15 years, I have been putting out training resources online. And in many of my programs, they cover strength training, they cover isometrics, they cover breath work, they cover internal power, meditation, martial arts. They cover the whole gamut
Hmm.
of physical culture and martial art. But one of the things that a few years ago, I had put together an online program for martial artists, and it was basically how to train a solo training program.
Hmm.
And in that, I included a module on isometrics. And the questions and the feedback that I got from that module, people were like, well, how do I learn more? I love this. I'm digging this. Like it became like everyone's favorite module in this program. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna expand on this. So I started writing and doing more research and using my own training. And I think it's a year, 2 years ago, I wrote the Isometric Warrior Training Guide.
Hmm.
And that became kind of an entry into isometrics for a lot of people. And that is available on Amazon. It's available on my website, which is warriorfitness.org. And, that book not only gives you a very solid foundation into isometrics, but it also gives you an entrance into my training system because I don't just give you the book, I give you a free Facebook group where we are talking all things isometrics. I have put extra chapters, bonus chapters in that Facebook group. I have put an entire free course that I call the Isometric Forge. That's a 21-day online course that's also free inside that Facebook group. So the only thing you need to do to get all that stuff is get the book. That's all. Just get the book.
It's a pretty darn good deal. And I'm gonna put a link to that into the description and the show notes, so anybody who's keen on checking that out can do so. And I think people should follow you elsewhere as well. You mentioned warriorfitness.org being your website. Are there any other
Yes,
places that people can follow you and get some cool insights into their training and gaining?
absolutely. You can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on Instagram. Um, those are the main two.
Yeah.
And you can also make sure to get on my email list because if you go on warriorfitness.org/book, I believe, you will get a free copy of my book, Warrior Fitness Conditioning for Martial Arts.
Hmm.
And you'll get on my email list and you will get all sorts of cool newsletter items and stay up to date on all the current training and what's happening in the future.
Fantastic. And I recommend that people do it. I always look forward to John's emails on a routine basis. Lots of great insights, lots of great information, and a fun read every time too. That's what got me to reach out because I was enjoying them so much. So
Thank you.
I'm gonna put the links into the description. So I highly recommend that people check this stuff out. Really, really good stuff. John, thank you for being here today. This was an awesome, awesome chat.
Thank you so much, Alex. I have very much enjoyed this. I love talking about strength training, isometrics, and of course, martial arts, my favorite topics. And we also touched on getting stronger as you get older, which is one of those key things that we all need to work on,
Mm,
no matter what your training is. Everybody wants to be healthy, strong, resilient, and pain-free. So you got to keep going.
exactly, exactly. And there's always a way forward, around, or through. It's up to you to find it. And John is one of the rare few who can help you to do that, and also in some particularly awesome old school ways. So check out the links in the description for all this great information. John, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you.
And as always, folks, have fun and happy training.